Alright boys, class is back in session. I'm here with a kind of tutorial on how to stop the most rampant deck in the format, or what I would consider to be one of the top decks, Beelzemon. So let's go ahead and kind of start by talking about what this deck does and how you can kind of choose your deck around it. So of course Beelzemon is known for its removal cards, as well as its ability to fill up the trash really quickly. So we're going to kind of talk about some ways to kind of counter that. So the first thing I want to mention is going to be non-deletion removal. So cards like All-Force Veedramon, Hydramon, Metal Grumon X, any card or monster that has an effect that removes a card from the field via bouncing the hand, bottom decking, maybe even something like a Chaos deck that puts in security, just doesn't trigger an on-deletion. This is really important because Beelzemon, while doesn't have a ton of on-deletion effects, one of the most prominent ones is going to be Beelzemon. Beelzemon does have the effect where you mill 3, and then after that, I think if you've got 10 or more in trash, on deletion you can play Beelzemon from your trash. So you definitely don't want your opponent to just get a free level 6 onto the field. So being able to put their guys in the bottom of their deck or bounce them back to hand is really, really strong. This also lets you bypass their main goal, which is to fill up the trash as quickly as possible. So while it doesn't matter too much on big stacks, like let's say you go Kaitis Breath, their big stack back to the hand, that's just one less card going into the trash. But if you can do this consistently enough to where maybe they're playing out their Intmons or their level 4s or 5s, and you can just consistently bounce them back to their hand, something like All Force gets like a bounce every turn, maybe Metal Grumon, you're playing like Sagittarius mode into Metal Grumon X, that's bouncing like 3 level 3s as well as level 4. Stuff like that can really add up, being able to like slow down the rate at which they're filling up their trash. So I think those kind of effects are really, really powerful. Next thing I kind of want to mention is going to be early aggro. So a lot of the times Beelzemon as a deck, the deck's kind of bricky, and I do want to say that Mulligan has helped that out quite a bit. But there are a lot of times where if they don't open the cards they need to mill, if they don't open their Missed Memory Boost or their Wizardmon X's, or anything like that, their first turn or two can kind of be just, without any cards in trash. So if you're playing a deck that has early aggro that's able to swing 1 or 2 times every single turn, decks like the Hunters or Crossheart, even Red Hybrid, those quote-unquote rookie rush decks that don't really care about losing their guys to security or deletion effects, you can just kind of poke at them every single turn, and by the time it gets to where they are making their Beelzemon stack, if they're already down to like 1 or 2 security left, you can close out the game pretty quickly, especially because the deck doesn't really play any defensive cards. Like I said, aside from their options in security, maybe something like a Rival's Barrage, Deathslinger 7-fold cluster, they do have quite a bit of options in security that might delete one of your Digimon. But if you're playing a deck that has just Digimon with save, you don't really care if they die. In fact, you want your Digimon to die, and a deck like Crossheart can swing into their security and then play out a bunch of Digimon with Rush that all have maybe material save or something like that. So again, those types of decks don't really care if they die. And similarly, Red Hybrid, their deck is just filled with on-deletion effects that play out of Flamemon or play out of Takuya. So these decks that can put early aggro on your opponents, but then also don't care about losing your stack. And even decks, maybe that if you do care about losing your stack, but if you're just like, you know that your opponent's like breaking early on, you can play out a bunch of rookies because they don't have too much wide removal up until they get into their Beelzemon, because the EX2 Beelzemon can remove like multiple rookies or level 4 or lower pretty quickly. But if they're not at that point yet, you can kind of go a little bit wide and poke at them quickly, like early on. So early aggro, I think, is really, really strong against that deck. And similarly, you want to be able to prevent early aggro from them. So a lot of the builds of Beelzemon are kind of just like an Impmon rush deck that also happen to go into like a Beelzemon and Beelzemon X late game for their win condition. But one thing you can do, one kind of strategy you can do if your deck allows it, is to set up what I like to call just big blockers, large blockers, to be able to prevent early aggro from your opponent. And it's also difficult for Beelzemon as a deck to be able to punch through those sorts of blocks. For example, all the Beelzemons are 11-12k. They do have the the Balmon inheritance to give them plus 2k, but realistically, unless they're swinging with the Blast mode, if you've got something like a War Greymon on field that's like plus 3,000 from the Metal Grey X, plus 3,000 from its own effect, plus 1,000 from like Tie or whatever, or if you got an Examon that's like 17k, Machine Dramon doesn't really care about the DP because it can protect itself from battle, stuff like that. If you've got these sorts of cards that are just too big for your opponent to get through, it can prevent their Beelzemon swings. Or if you've got stuff that can block multiple times, again, that can save you security in the early game. Being able to block twice with something like War Greymon, blocking twice with Machine Dramon, maybe if you got Reboot Blocker on it, but then you've also got like an Analog Man in play, that's really strong. Examon's another really good example because you can like block, it unsuspend itself, and then suspend one of your opponent's other Digimon, so you essentially get like you get to stun one of theirs or suspend one of theirs, and then you get to block twice. Magnamon X is a card that can block basically infinite times so long as it's got the X antibody or Magnamon underneath it, and provided your opponent doesn't remove it in some sort of way. So these cards I think can be really, really valuable, and I think we might see a resurgence of these sorts of decks. War Greymon, really, really solid. Machine Dramon, even throughout BT11, it was kind of showing up what it can do towards the end of BT11. But Examon, Magnamon, I don't think we've quite seen in a while, but I think they might be really, really solid into a lot of the Tier 1 decks. Not even just Beelzemon, but into Red Hybrid as well, Crossheart, being able to just prevent early aggros and low Digimon swings, like Digimon with low DP, because a lot of these Digimon aren't really getting too big, like I said, unless they've got a really strong stack with Beelzemon. But even then, a deck like Magnamon or Machine Dramon won't really care about the DP, and they're never getting bigger than a War Greymon. But so blockers, I think, can be really good. And kind of building off of that idea, I think blockers with protection effects primarily can be really, really strong. Protection effects, by this I mean protection effects from deletion, so cards like Arena that give your Digimon evade, or just Digimon with evade in general, like Slayer Dramon can, that whole line in the Examon deck can kind of give evade to your Examon. So again, why I think Examon is a really, really strong pick for this format. But evade is a really strong keyword, and then the Greymon line is notorious for being able to prevent deletion effects. You've got stuff like BT9 as well as BT11 and Greymon X. You've got stuff like Metal Greymon Alterous Mode. You've got Yuya, your tamer, that makes you unaffected by options, so you can protect yourself from rivals or Deathslinger or anything like that. So having protection from deletion effects is really, really strong, especially because we know that Beelzemon basically only has deletion effects at their disposal. Like a standard Beelzemon list, and we'll just be playing, their 7th full cluster, Rivals, Barrage, Deathslinger. You've got the built-in deletion from stuff like Blast Mode, or like the old Blast Mode maybe, if they're playing that, or stuff like EX2 Beelzemon. But outside of that, Purple does not really have any removal effects that don't delete. Like, their stuff is going to be deletion based, so if you got protection from the deletion effects, if you're playing any sort of Greymon deck or any blue deck that can utilize Examon, or even any evade mechanic like that, or even a deck like Galacticmon, that, again, kind of talking about the whole big blocker thing, Galacticmon, I think they have like an inherited that like lets you redirect attacks. But basically the same thing, where you can redirect attacks, and then you've got a 14k body that can't easily be removed. Even if you're not making your stack a blocker, the fact that you can go like wide or promote your Digimon without really fear of losing them, even in a deck like Black War Greymon or War Greymon X, right? War Greymon deck X is a OTK deck. You don't really care about like setting up a blocker or anything like that, aside from maybe if you're playing like BT12 Warg. But if you're just swinging into their security, like checking 3 or 4 with your Warg X, it's still sitting at like 15,000 DP. It can't be removed via deletion because you've got like 3-4 layers of protection going to maybe a Blitz Omni, and you've got more protection based on there. Like, it's really hard for your opponent to be able to deal with that. So honestly, just protection effects in general, I think, are going to be really, really strong this format. And then another honorable mention I kind of want to talk about here. This one's a little bit maybe less or like maybe more specific depending on the deck you can play. I think these techs are basically only utilizable in purple decks, but if you are playing maybe any sort of Minerva Loop deck, or even Beelzemon itself, I think you could consider playing Megidramon as well as Creepymon. So Chaos deck, I wanted to mention just as like a security control. It's like the face of security control, right? Security control as a deck does really, I think it does really poorly into Beelzemon generally. But just solely due to the fact, I think, because they have early aggro, they don't really care if their dudes die. And then Beelzemon X is an absolute menace. Being able to trash 2 to 3 security cards is really strong. But if you can heal up to maybe like 5 or 6 or 7, if they're trashing 3 security cards, like, alright, do you really care? They're only really doing that once, maybe twice if you give them enough memory, but more often than not, you're going to have the out to be able to get rid of their stack immediately. So even if they do go into their wombo combo, you're just going to remove their card next turn, and then you can really outgrind them that way. I think depending on the build of security control, you can kind of outgrind them, and you can punish players who are a little bit too greedy and a little bit too eager to mill with a strategy like that. In addition to that, Creepy and Megidramon I want to bring up specifically because they're multi-purpose. These cards, like if you're playing like a deck like Beelzemon or like Minerva Loop that wants cards in their trash, these cards are just generally good. Like Megidramon milling 5, Creepymon milling 2 from your deck. If you're playing Beels and you mill 5, like, okay, yeah, your opponent gets effects too, but if they're lower on their deck count, maybe if they're 5 or lower, you can just straight up deck them out. And the Megidramon's also really good because it triggers all of your trash effects, so you can maybe gain memory off of your promo Wizardmon, maybe bring something back with your EX2 Beelzemon, stuff like that. Creepymon's again really good because you get to mill 2 from your deck, and if like for each of the Digimon your opponent has in play, and then you can also potentially bring back one of your level 5s, maybe bring back like a Ballmon, go on up into Beels, delete something with that, and then for every 10 in your trash, you get to, when attacking, trash the top 3, so you can just mill like 6 or 9 cards off your opponent's deck. Milling them out pretty quickly is really cool, so definitely wanted to mention those cards. And then lastly here, just a couple of spicy techs I did want to mention. In addition to like the whole security control argument, Venusmon works really well in that deck because Venusmon is able to stop the Beelzemon X on evolve effect. So I honestly think, despite security control being unfavored in this meta just because of all of the decks like Hunters and Cross Heart, Red Hybrid, all the crazy aggro decks, I still think it does have a place in the meta. It might not be tier 1, but I think it's still definitely playable. Venusmon is a really good card, again, not just against Beelzemon, against basically every deck in the game. This card's still really crazy, stops Beelzemon X on evolve, stops any on evolve of anything that has Psych Attack keyword, so basically everything for that turn is just really, really strong. Avenge Kid is another card that I think is kind of cool. Not sure how good this will be because it does actually put cards back in their deck. If you're playing a deck like Security Control, you generally want to mill them out, but maybe this could be a tech in some other decks as well. But it does actually put back some of their cards that they want in trash, like 7th Full Cluster. That does, it's an option card with the trash effect, so being able to put that back can save you losing a Digimon later on, and it does also lower their trash count. So maybe if they're sitting at 20 cards but you don't want them to get that like blast mode unsuspend or something, or that Impmon warp, you can put back like 5 or 6 cards with the Avenge Kidmon effect. And then last card I did want to kind of mention was Gazimon. The Gazimon Floodgates, the ones that prevent your opponent from gaining memory except via tamer effects, stuff like Gazi, Terriermon, Madoki Beta. These cards are really, really strong in theory, but I've found throughout testing more often than not, your opponent playing Beelzemon is able to remove them pretty easily. Beelzemon on evolve as well as when attacking has that effect. The Warp Impmon has an effect to remove level 3s. They've got multiple cards that can remove lower level Digimon, so I honestly don't, as weird as it sounds, I don't know if playing the Gazi Floodgates is actually really worth it in this format, at least for Beelzemon, just because they are able to remove it so quickly and efficiently. But anyways, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed this talk about Beelzemon X. I really enjoy doing like kind of deck analysis like this, so if you did enjoy, let me know down in the comment section below, and don't forget to like the video. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.